Let's take a look at today's agenda. Today's webinar is Marketing and Messaging for Home-Based Childcare and bringing home-based childcare to center stage, building a toolbox for effective messaging strategies. So we're going to start with a welcome and do the review of our core beliefs and the terms that we're going to be using during this session. If you can, go ahead and place your name and where you're joining us from in the chat box. So we'll get to know each other a little bit that way. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeanna, who's going to remind us of our core beliefs in our work and define some of the terms that we use throughout these series.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Danielle. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. We do a check-in on the core beliefs that build family childcare and home-based childcare work is built upon. We are continuing to evolve these a little bit as we are now a few years into our work. So we are always eager for feedback on the core beliefs. But one of the things that we know, and this topic and Cherie and Shannon strategies joining us is so important, is that there's an element in all of these core beliefs about family childcare being a full partner and participant in our early care and education system. And what we also know is that at times there is a lack of understanding of family childcare as a element of the early care and education system. We hear a lot of requests for communication support and marketing support around family childcare in states and communities. And so all of these core beliefs, whether it's about how family childcare is integrated into the mixed delivery system, how it's funded on par with the rest of the system and center-based partners, how we ensure that family childcare are leading the supports and leading decisions about themselves. All of those things do hinge to whether or not people understand what family childcare is and see and value it. And a lot of that has to do with marketing and messaging. So today's topic is so important as a foundational element of our work together. And we're really eager to unpack it with you. And we know that it'll just be the beginning of more discussions about how do we do this well? And how do we really make sure that we're messaging the concepts in a way that is actually accurately captures them and also is digestible for the audiences that we're trying to educate about family childcare. So one other piece of intro before we move into this is to talk a little bit more about some of the terms that we use. So you heard just there at the beginning of that slide that I used family childcare and home-based childcare, and I intentionally use them both in that moment. One of the things that we always want to be reminding of, and this actually highlights this idea of how sometimes what we communicate can almost be a little bit too complex for some of the audiences that we may be communicating to, is the fact that there are a lot of different terms for family childcare, home-based childcare that's occurring in people's homes. And we use a lot of them interchangeably in order to be inclusive, in order to acknowledge that what one state uses as a term to refer to a family friend and neighbor or a license exempt setting is not the same as what another state uses. So that's one of the reasons from our vantage point, we are trying to be inclusive of all the different context of your states and communities. But we acknowledge that in doing that, at times that those terms don't mean the same thing to everyone. So we want to sort of put forward that we are referring to the concept of home-based childcare in multiple ways, and that we also have at many instances moved towards messaging that the owner is an educator, and we fully believe that. We also hear a lot of times from family childcare providers that they want to be referred to as the provider owner because they have a tremendous amount of pride in owning a small business. And so they don't use the term educator to refer to themselves. So we are trying to, with that, also be inclusive of the terms of who staffs or leads family childcare or home-based childcare setting. So just like to put out there, it's not so much a defining of terms as the slide title, but the inclusivity of the terms that we try and employ in our work, which I think does, if nothing else, hits the nail on the head about marketing and messaging. All the different terms to refer to this work is clearly one of the pieces of it. So with that little bit of context setting, I'm going to turn it back to Danielle for us to jump into our content today.
Thanks, Jeanna. Well, we are so excited to have Cherie Shannon of Shannon Strategies, a Richmond-based woman and Black-owned communications firm specializing in campaigns for the greater good, join us today. She is familiar with home-based childcare. Cherie is an award-winning communications strategist, a community liaison, and an environmental advocate who's dedicated her career to social causes that benefit the greater good for more than 15 years. So we are, like I said, we're just so excited. And at Cherie Strategies, they believe in the power of people and shifting power to the people and uplifting communities by listening, learning, and building relationships to enact positive change. So we just knew that that would be a great fit to bring to you all today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cherie.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Hey, y'all, I'm so excited to be here today. It's 3 o'clock on the East Coast. I'm just going to say this to you all, the same that I do with my clients. If you haven't eaten, please go eat something. For those of you on the West Coast, I know it's lunchtime. So if you are off camera, feeding your body and your soul, that is also good. We are definitely proponents of people and making sure that we are able to protect and take care of ourselves. And so I wanted to give that shout out really quick before we started our presentation today. Let's talk a little bit about communications in general, and more often than not, something that comes up with messaging. People are like, oh, how do we talk about this? And we need to be able to get in front of these specific people. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But the first question I ask is like, what are you trying to do? So let's hit that next slide to talk a little bit about communications goals whenever you are in front of different audiences. So for our team, we like to set just 4 general comms goals, and some of them overlap and they can be used interchangeably. But the first thing on the list is to inform, and that's to expand reach and raise awareness. And that actually might look like an event that you are hosting. So this webinar is a perfect example of information sharing. There was an email or a few emails that went out, there's social media posts, maybe something through word of mouth, but essentially you're trying to let people know about the thing, whatever the thing is. And often that can be an event. The second communication goal that really falls into like policy and advocacy space is persuasion. We're trying to change minds here. What does that look like? Well, my husband and I, we might have a disagreement on like the best movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We have this conversation all the time, right? He has his own set of beliefs. I have my own set of beliefs and values. And so what I'm trying to do is persuade him. I'm trying to get him to change his mind to see my perspective and my view of things. That is what we mean by persuasion. And persuasion comes up, especially when we're talking about trying to shift how some of our legislators and policymakers view our area of work. Request is a call to action. And usually when we think of a call to action, it's like, oh man, it has to be something urgent and really big and the world is on fire and I need you to call your representative to do something. Yes, that's true, but that's not all that a call to action is. A call to action can be, hey, sign up for our newsletter. We need you to follow us on social media. Give us a donation. Come to my event. That's what a request is, right? So being very specific about knowing what you want people to do from the very beginning before you put any type of messaging together. And lastly, throughout all of this, we always want to be striving to build relationships, to engage audiences. And so that question we always need to ask ourselves is like, well, who do we want to be talking to? Who should we be talking to? How do we want to get to those people? It might be a meeting. It can be on social media. It might be an email. It might be through this webinar, for example. After we have this session today, some of you may reach out to me on Twitter. You might actually send me an email. What you're doing is you're building a relationship. And we cannot be successful in any line of business. It doesn't matter if you are in home-based childcare, if you have a consultancy like me, if you have a restaurant. If you don't have customers, if you don't have clients, if you're not building relationships with people, then you're not going to be successful. So always remember, for all of the goals that we've kind of outlined today, that what I really want to underscore is like throughout all of this, you always want to make sure that you are engaging your audiences in an effective way. So if you're working with policymakers, if you are working with your colleagues, if it's state officials, it doesn't matter who it is, think about the type of relationship that you have or the relationship that you want to be having with those individuals. Knowing your audience. So who exactly are we trying to reach out to? So the first question is, what do we want to do? And then the next question we have to ask ourselves is like, who are we trying to reach? For home-based childcare, it can be a few things. And I actually, I put just a simple list together where you might find relevant. It could be parents and families, the clients that you serve, employers and other members of the business community, elected officials and policymakers, state agencies, and even journalists. Now, I've put this list together of folks that you might encounter with your work, whether you're a provider or an educator, a business owner, or even if you're a consultant, or you could be just a friend, right? So like, you're engaging with different types of people, but what's important for you to think about is like, what role do they play? If we're looking at a journalist, for example, a journalist is going to want to know a little bit more about your story. They're also going to provide a platform for talking about issues that you care about, compared to someone in the business community. Well, the relationship you have with that person, you might be part of the chamber of commerce, or you might want to talk to an employer because they need to know about the benefits of childcare. You might be able to build some relationship where you can say like, oh, hey, you know what? I provide these services. I think it would be great that you talk to your employees about these services. Who are these people? What role do they play? What are their interests? What do they do within your community? Because we also have to remember when we're talking about ourselves, we aren't just our own profession, right? Like we're whole people with our own interests and beliefs and values. We're parents. We are volunteers. You might like to garden. You might like going to like NASCAR races, whatever it is. You're in community with different types of people. And knowing whenever you're focusing on your messaging and you're trying to build your communications, asking yourself these questions, who are these folks? What role do they play? What role do I need them to play in order to achieve my goal? And so all of that, the what are we trying to do and the who are we trying to reach? And then you get in front of these folks and then you have to answer the why. Why is this important? This is when we start to build our message. So a message answers why it's important, right? It's the core values and ideas your campaign or project conveys through words, visuals, and stories. And I have to emphasize, a message is not a slogan or a hashtag. A perfect example was the core beliefs that we heard just like at the beginning of this session here, in which we're saying that family childcare and family friend and neighbor care settings, whether licensed or license exempt, are part of a fabric of a mixed delivery system for early care and education. That's your message. So what I hear, if I'm like to break this down a little bit more, is that childcare is the care of children as a service to parents while they work across mixed settings, including within a home. The same way that you may have your dentist or your medical doctor, whatever, they could be practicing in a hospital or a storefront, or it could be a home that's now commercially licensed. You too are also a practitioner who's doing this craft as an educator, caregiver, teacher, provider within a home-based setting. I hope you all are able to see that, right? So I just want to emphasize again, your message is always going to come down to your core values and ideas. It's not just a slogan or a hashtag. Those two things are helpful, but just making sure that you are always conveying, this is what we believe in. So I have a message box here. Feel free to take this box, screenshot it, make the presentation available later, right? You can copy it. I don't care. I want you to use this. So a message box allows you to break down the different components of what your message is going to be comprised of. First, in the center, we have the issue. What are you talking about? And then you go up top and you have the problem. So what is the challenge that needs to be addressed? So let's say, for example, if I have an issue, it's, oh man, okay, I live in a state and they don't recognize family childcare or home-based childcare, right? So you want to talk about home-based childcare not being recognized. What is the problem? Well, I just said the problem is it's not being recognized by our policymakers. Okay, go to the left. So what? Why should they care? Well, then this,
Yeah.
sorry. So then this is where you say, well, you should care. I mean, one, because we're dope people and we provide essential services. But this is when you insert your case on the why, right? Like what this means to you, how this impacts you. Solutions. That's when we start to move a little bit towards that advocacy, right? Whereas like, we need you to act upon something. We need you to do this. And when you take that action, when you act upon this is who benefits from it. It's not just me, but it's a community of folks, other providers, other educators, other caregivers. So you start in the center, start with the problem, work your way around, boom, all right? And then of course, always making sure that you've identified the audience and who's impacted by this. Another message box. So if that one's complicated, I gave you two for one, y'all, right? Okay, so simplify it even more. Identify the problem. What problem are you trying to solve? Who's going to benefit from this? What action should people take? That call to action, and then the solution. What change are you proposing? So I just gave 2 examples of message boxes that you can use, and it's great for you to think through this critically so you can go from this is where we are and this is where we need to be. And that's how you should be crafting your message from a communications perspective. All right. So we have some tweets here that I pulled up. I've entered childcare and I was like, I want to see what people are saying about childcare. On the top left, we have a tweet from Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia. And he says, across Virginia, I hear about childcare. Parents are having to pay too much. There aren't enough options. Workers are underpaid. And then he tagged Senator Patty Murray and said, so Patty Murray and I have a proposal to fix this. Our economy doesn't work the way it should if we don't have affordable childcare options for parents. All right. I highlighted within this tweet, workers are underpaid. Now, when we're talking about childcare, there has been a lot of focus on kind of just like the care that parents need, often leaving out the workforce with who actually are providing this care and the learning within these spaces. But Tim Kaine makes sure to talk about like workers are underpaid. And I think that's significant because he's highlighting an essential part of this equation. So remember that. I'm just gonna move on to the next tweet. On the right-hand side, we have Representative Lauren Underwood from Illinois. She said, I led a group of 100 House and Senate colleagues of a letter to POTUS, urging him to extend the student loan payment pause. This will especially help low-income, Black and Brown, and women borrowers, and help them keep a roof over their heads, secure childcare, and purchase food. Now, again, she's talking about extending the student loan payment pause, but this is an economic issue. And within that, she's talking about who it's going to support, how it's going to support them, and included with that, she said securing childcare. That's sandwiched between housing and nutrition. That's essential, right? So like, again, think about like how, whenever we're talking about people's livelihoods, their economic situations, childcare can always be part of that conversation. On the bottom left from Ahmad Ali, he said, what does meaningful poverty prevention look like? He lists all these things: livable wages, affordable housing, supporting pay equity, investing in affordable childcare, providing paid leave and paid sick days, There's nothing inevitable about poverty. No one chooses to be poor. Poverty prevention. Childcare is part of the solution for poverty prevention. And then from the LA Policy Institute, investing in policies like paid leave, childcare, and home and community-based services will not only improve the quality of caregiving jobs and reduce family stress, but would also help more unpaid caregivers join the labor force. Okay, so I pulled a few examples out of all this, but essentially what I'm trying to say is, if we're talking about childcare as an industry, if we're talking about the economy, if we're talking about people's livelihood, housing, student loan payments, for example, childcare always seems to come up as part of a solution. So one key takeaway I want to say for your messaging, whenever you're talking about a benefit of this, make sure that you're emphasizing the power of childcare, right? Home-based childcare as a solution to many of the challenges that families face today. And then some more tweets. And this, I think, is important to point out. So these are kind of responses within the thread. And so on the top left, Sandy said, and childcare workers, yet we merely pay lip service when we tell these people how much they are valued. And someone said, yes, child care workers, definitely, they're teachers and carers in one. So there's almost like this call and response. Someone is saying they posted an article and they had left out childcare. And then this other person said, yes, they're advocating for you, right? I don't know if I'm on Twitter what this person's profession is. I don't know if they are a childcare, if they're in home-based childcare themselves. They could be, have a cousin who might have their own childcare. It might not be them directly, but notice how this person is advocating for you. On the left, it's insane how little we pay childcare workers and how much we expect from them. We are not a nation that values children. And then on the bottom right, this is from Canada, and I thought this was interesting. That's from the Saskatchewan party. So they were talking about building a better Saskatchewan and making life more affordable. And that addendum at the bottom where someone says, I hope the childcare workers are getting a raise also. So these are kind of just those messaging examples I want to highlight where we know what these problems are, we've identified these problems, but in all of these instances, there are other people who are advocating for you through public discourse in these spaces. And so we want to make sure that the messaging that we're using, that you're creating, can also be used by other people, such as myself. If I'm online, right, if my neighbor, my husband, my friend, if they are equipped with that information, if they have that messaging down, they know what you do, they know who you are, they know about the services that you provide, we can also be your cheerleaders and your advocates within these spaces. So I wanted to just highlight why we want to make sure from problem, solution, and benefit on this spectrum is why it's important for us to be consistent about what we're saying. Because if you're all saying the same thing, then I'm going to start saying the same thing. And when I start saying the same thing, I can also champion for you on these other platforms as well. So then the question becomes, what is your story? And I think my mom registered for today's webinar. So hi, Mom, if you are here. But I wanted to share this story. This is a picture of us a few years ago. But my mom at one point was a family childcare provider. And I think that's significant. So by me saying that, some of you are probably like, Sweetie Cakes, hi, Mom. By me saying that, it kind of establishes an immediate connection, right, on this call, because I'm sharing part of my personal story. And what is interesting about being in this space, she and I talked recently about her experiences as a family childcare provider, because I was fortunate enough to have a new client in this space. And I said to her, I was like, Mom, so like when you had all those kids in the house all those years, I'm like, you weren't just watching those kids, like you were a family childcare provider. And she's like, duh, like, yes, like, what are you talking about? And I was like, no, but I never made that connection at that age, right? Like my mom is a caregiver and she's a teacher as well. And what was interesting, she kind of like checked me in that moment and she said, well, you probably weren't paying attention, right? And I was like, ooh, that kind of burned a little bit. But I needed to hear that. And that stuck with me because I think about the number of people who might be in our lives or within our communities who might not be paying attention. And so I think it's important for us, for you all to create these stories and to share your stories, not only with the people in your life, but also who you're in community with. Because the young folks who are in your homes, they're not just there hanging out, chilling, right? You're not just giving them snacks. They are growing and they're developing under your tutelage, right? There is a level of education that is happening that is essential, that is on the same level within other settings. And I want you to make sure that you are giving yourselves that credit, and the folks in your life and within your community also need to be able to give you that level of credit. And so creating your story, sharing your story, it's important for you to do this because you're helping to build trust, you're building connections, and overall, you're going to be speaking with a larger collective voice, right? Okay, I see some heads nodding. This is good. And Mom, sorry for, I know you probably weren't ready to see your face on the screen, but I hope I did you proud. Okay. So just some pro tips here. Start a messaging document that can be updated regularly. Something that I do on my team, and Mary Beth, I know you're on this call too. Hey girl, hey. I like following like Mary Beth's tweets, and she probably doesn't know that I do this, but every once in a while, like I see new vocabulary and language that I like, and I bookmark it and I add it to this running document. And so I'm encouraging all of you to do the same thing. Like start a messaging document, questions that people may have for you that you're constantly answering over and over again. If you're going to meetings with state policymakers or legislators and they're like, who are you? I don't know what you're doing. Start to write all of that down. And then over time, if you're reading a news article, if you're having a conversation with somebody, if you're attending a webinar like this, and there are little nuggets that you really like and you want to start using yourself, put that in that document. And know that it is not a final document, it is a living document that you should be updating regularly. Use social media to gauge public discourse throughout your messaging as well. And so I show Twitter, right? I took those screenshots to see what is happening. It doesn't have to be Twitter. It can be Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever it is. But I want you to start to see how other people are talking about your industry. If you're noticing that folks are using the wrong terminology, one, of course, take that as an opportunity to educate them. But then you can say, I'm so tired of why they keep saying this. Like they need to stop saying this. Great, you've identified an issue. And now we can figure out how we can address that issue, right? And then lastly, I want you to capture feedback and stories in real time. So if you are having a meeting or if you're on the phone with somebody and you're like, ooh, that was fire. I like this. I like what they said. Like, can I use that? Ask them, can I use that? Right? Capture that story in real time. It could be a survey. You can have some type of like call to action on social media. You want folks to show up to a city council meeting. When you are hearing these stories, when folks are telling you like what they are experiencing day to day, You want to be able to use that to help shape your narrative as well. And in the long run, this is going to save you time and having to go back through some emails and trying to go through your text messages and be like, what did homegirl say? I don't remember. I'm giving you these pro tips now. Okay. So I hope this has been helpful. All right. So I've said a lot. Talked about the what, we talked about the who, we talked about the why. Now we get to the how. All right. So I have a lot of words on the screen. That is just to impress you all with all of the options that you have, right? Okay. So on the social media side, social and digital media, you have a website. You can use a blog, email blasts and newsletters, photos and videos. You can text people. Texting is very, very powerful. Okay. Do not forget about texting. There's social media itself, and then there's graphics and infographics. So there's a larger list just on the digital side. And then on traditional media and grassroots outreach, there are press releases and press statements, which you will send out when there's an announcement. There's an op-ed and a letter to the editor. There are events. This is an event. This counts as communications outreach. Policy papers and data products, one pages and leave behinds. If you're at a meeting, do you go empty-handed? No, you come prepared, right? You want folks to take information with them. Flyers, brochures, and postcards, as well as public service announcements. And one thing about PSAs, I just want to say, I say this to my clients all the time. PSAs are so underutilized. They are free. Hello, they are free, okay? What I mean is, more often than not, there's public radio, there's a community radio station. If you have an event, if there's information you want to get out there, you can record a 30 to 45-second message. It can be on your phone, it can be on Zoom, you might go into the studio. They will play this on the air for free. I just have to say, I have to emphasize that because people really underutilize PSAs. So for all these things in the toolbox, right? Like this is just one way. I'm just showing you all of the different options that you have for when you're putting your message box together. You're like, what are we trying to do? Oh, we're going to have a conference, or we need to have a meeting with a state policymaker, or wow, that guy really pisses me off. He's such a problem. We got to figure out what to do about him. These are some different tactics that you have that you should be thinking about how to use and knowing when to deploy them, okay? So we're going to run through some scenarios here, right? All right. So what I'm going to run through, I have 3 scenarios. And I would love for everyone to use the chat, which you have graciously done already, so I know you can do it. I'm going to read this example, and then I want you all to put in the chat some ideas of what you think you could do in every scenario, all right? And I want you to think about this as your professional self, whether you are a nonprofit leader, you're a provider, a consultant, you might just be a little hustler, I don't know, right? And also like your personal self, because we are, again, whole people. And so we view things through different lenses. Either is fine, your professional and or your personal self. So in scenario 1, we have a news article here. You see this headline, and you might agree or disagree with the article. What should you do? And so the headline is, "Not the year for women and parents. Child care provisions were cut from the Inflation Reduction Act. It's not the first time." And this is a real headline that was on CNN last week on August the 12th. So if you see this headline, or if you read this article, whether you can agree or disagree with it, what are some of the things that you might do after reading this article? And so I'm going to give you a few minutes to answer that question, and you can put your ideas in the chat. I love it. Write a letter to the editor, get in touch with the author. Yep. I love saying op-eds right off the bat. Come on, people who like to write. Yes. A blog is great. Repost on social media. Yep. Meet with legislators. Ooh, a video for my parent. Ooh, somebody likes to produce. Okay. Message to the team. Yes, that camaraderie is great. Contacting Congress, share with parents and staff, call to action, engage with your state's representatives. You can send out a tweet. These are all great. So we have sharing on social media. Yes, immediately share on social media. You can share with your network, your family and friends, your colleagues. I also love the idea of a response op-ed or a letter to the editor, which also somehow is underutilized. So think about this, for a letter to the editor, it's generally anywhere between 250 to 300 words. And you're like, well, how long is that? It's 3 paragraphs, right? I think you can write 3 paragraphs. For an op-ed, anywhere between 650 to 800 words. And folks from your local newspaper, they want to hear from you because you live there. So that's a page and a half. So don't be intimidated by actually issuing a letter to the editor or an op-ed. I love the idea of the video from a parent. Absolutely, yes, with your talking points. People love to see your face. They love to be able to hear from you, and make sure that that video is also captioned so it's accessible. And then those call to actions to meet with your legislators. So like, I like this. I like that you all have like all of these great ideas. So this is just one scenario in which you're thinking like, hey, when I see something like this, what should I do? Always know that there is some action that you can take in response to this. Okay, next scenario, business community. Family childcare is an essential service in the community. You'd like to help employers in your area learn more about the benefits of home-based childcare. How can you build a relationship? And so depending on how you view yourself, right? But how can you build a relationship with other businesses, other small business owners within your own community? Ooh, I like that. Host a lunch and learn. Learn about the businesses and reasons for turnover. Attend the Chamber of Commerce, which is really smart. Invite them to your program. A tour is fantastic. Speak at the Rotary Club, attend community events, start a business Facebook group, very smart. Virtual roundtable, crossover with like-minded businesses. I like this. I like that everyone immediately is like, hey, we can attend events, we can host events, right? Like that is also part of engagement because it provides an opportunity for people to learn about you and the work that you do in your profession. I also want to just ask this question. Now, if you're hosting these events, what are you taking with them, right? Is it a flyer? Is it a brochure? Are you directing people somewhere? Wink, wink, a website maybe. So I want y'all to see like all of those items that we kind of just went through on your toolbox. These are things that you're also going to pull together if you are talking about building a relationship with the business community. Oh, yes, the libraries. Yes. Does anyone have like the huge bulletin board at their local library where you post? Okay, good. It's not just me. Yeah, shout out to the libraries. Thank you for bringing that up. Public spaces, community centers. Thanks for that reminder. I appreciate that. Building a coalition. So here is a screenshot of a rally from Philadelphia in which childcare workers, they did a day without childcare at City Hall. And so thinking like, man, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of people at this event. How did they get all those people at this event? So scenario, there are many childcare providers who may not know that your organization or state network exists. How do you grow your network? If you're hosting an event or you want to host an event, or you want people to learn about your business, or you need folks to show up at the state legislature, who are you gonna call, right? Who's in your network? How are you going to reach the people that may not know that you exist. Engage with your state network. We're always excited to help providers start their own organizations and networks. Yep. Host community events. Tabling events is great.
Cherie, we had one question about the
Mhm.
difference between a PSA and an ad, and understanding that
Oh.
it may be more complicated than we have time for at the moment. Is there a simple answer for that?
There is a simple answer. So an advertisement is a paid placement of content. A public service announcement is informational and nonpartisan. So an example, hey everyone, don't forget that midterms are this year and you should be registered to vote. Da da da, paid for by Shannon Strategies. So when putting that PSA together, just really quick, it just needs to be informational, right? And then you can give the shout out at the end for a website or a place where people can get that information.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Oh, wait a minute. Paper dolls with messages, strong hand to hand at our Capitol. Oh, I like this. Okay. You all have like really great suggestions. I love this. So again, when building a coalition, thinking what I didn't see in here, what I'm going to suggest, because I see a lot of in-person as well. You might have to do some canvassing. Like if you have an opportunity to do that, or people power, old-fashioned knocking on doors, going to other hosting community events is really great. Going to your PTA, right? Anything that's hosted at the public library or community center. Those are all great ways to engage with people. And again, when you are talking to folks, they're going to be like, okay, do you have a leave behind, a grip card, whatever it is? How can I find contact information? That's a website, that's social media. It might be something within hand. So these are all like part of your messaging strategy when you're reaching out to people. So some final tips. Ooh, I did good on time today. Oh my gosh, yes. Come through. Some final tips. Use empowering language that respects and reflects how people choose to talk about and identify themselves, right? I think that's when you tell folks, this is who I am, this is how I want to be referred to, folks need to respect that, and then vice versa. Make adjustments and measure your progress. Set measurable objectives and use analytics to see what's performing the best. You can try the throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks at the beginning, but you shouldn't be doing that every single time, right? Over time, you want to be able to refine that process. If you know that, if you notice like, oh man, this post got a lot of great hits, or like this email had a lot of opens because we talked about this specific thing, continue to drill down and refine that so you can have better performance. Increase accessibility. Caption videos and provide alt text for images and interpretation for events in Spanish, ASL, and other languages whenever possible. And lastly, don't just post and distribute content, engage with your audiences. It's very easy to just like, boom, I'm going to spray folks with a bunch of social media messages, but it's like, but folks are commenting, they want to engage with you, and they want to know that you also consider what they have to say important. So make sure you're asking questions, you're replying to those comments, and you're building relationships as well. So in review, right? I'm just going to keep saying it. You have to keep asking yourself these questions. What are you trying to do? Who do you need to reach? Why is this important? And then how are you going to reach your goal? Those are kind of the 4 critical questions that you should be asking yourselves when putting together your messaging strategy, and also how you're going to measure progress, right? Because over time, you might be saying to yourself, oh man, we tried this one thing, it didn't work. Okay, well, maybe you didn't have the right audience, right? Or maybe you tried something on Facebook when you really should have been on LinkedIn. You don't know, right? So like, just continue to ask yourself these questions, continue to check in, to assess that, to assess your progress. And then like over time, you'll really start to get in a groove and you're like, oh man, this is when we should send an op-ed versus this is when we should do a PSA. Or you're like, this is when we need to throw the whole kitchen sink because Congress is acting a fool. You never know, right? So that's all I have for you today. I think I have one final slide. Yes, okay. So if you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me at Cherie at shannonstrategies.com. I believe the website was in the chat as well, shannonstrategies.com. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, you can follow us on Shannon Strategy. That's my presentation for today. So I hope that you all enjoyed it. I hope that there was a little nugget that you walked away with. Please say yes. Because if you didn't, then I didn't do my jobs, and that would make me really sad. But anyways, all right, y'all. Thank you.
Cherie, thank you so much. We have all benefited from this intro to marketing and messaging and this how to develop a toolkit. We have a couple minutes left. If you're open to it, I want to open it just for a couple of questions. If there's anyone who either wants to come off mute or wants to put their question in the chat box, we can take a couple of questions until our time ends with each other today. Something I saw as people are putting their comments in the chat, one of the comments I saw was the importance of engaging fathers and business owners in this topic. Is there anything in particular that you would suggest for that line of marketing or messaging?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think that we still have to tackle the patriarchy. I mean, it's a systemic and societal issue, but in general, when we're talking about childcare, right? Or even like I saw a friend say, hey, y'all, when you are emailing my home about like after school activities, don't exclude my husband from the list, right? And I want to say we, but like we default to moms, because when we're talking about caregiving and domestic work, historically speaking, that work has fallen to women. So I think overall, though, we have to do a better job, and we can use language in which that is more inclusive to say parents, guardians, right? When we're talking about like who our clients are, families. It doesn't have to be gender specific. So just thinking about how to be more inclusive with our language, recognizing that we're not just defaulting to like women, but we're really talking about like the person who is taking care of the child and how we're working with them as well.
Thank you. We have another question from, let's see, it says, what's the radius generally of targeting prospective clients for a family child care business? How far afield should you be looking?
I think it depends on where you live and like what makes sense to you. So, you all are the experts here, right? So I don't know like what that competition is like within a particular geographic area, but I will say like, depending on if you're in rural area or in suburbs compared to like in an urban setting, like think about like who you actually want to be working with and targeting those individuals. Instead of maybe thinking of this like geographically from like a radius, like think about the folks who need your services and who you want to be working with.
I have another question. How do we build more of a collective message that we all push when we don't necessarily all agree on some of the specifics?
I was waiting for this question. Because I've sat in those meetings and it's challenging because a lot of this does come down to policy and politics. And so what I see this space moving towards, honestly, it's similar to like the labor movement. I think the way that childcare has to organize probably can broaden up a little bit. Probably has to be a little bit more inclusive of who's at the table having these conversations. And knowing that like I have noticed a difference in how home-based childcare is, you guys start off with, you say like childcare, which includes this, right? Whereas in other spaces, they only default to like centers or schools. And I know that's controversial, and we can get on that. We could talk about that another day. But I think that collectively, we have to get to a place similarly with the labor movement in which we're saying, like, this is childcare, and childcare includes all of these things, right? And the way that you all are advocating for folks in all of the settings, we need other people to be advocating for you the same way, knowing that it's not a competition. We all have to get there together.
I think we have time for one more question. There's a question around, well, first, there's a lot of love around the removing the gendered aspects of messaging for to parents for many different reasons in the chat. So thank you for that feedback. But the question around how or who do we reach out to if we want to do a PSA in our local radio station? Do we just call them? Is there a website or a process that you suggest?
Yes, okay. So information gathering is important. Everyone has an NPR affiliate. You might, here in Virginia is VPM for me. If you're in Northern Virginia, it's WAMU. So find who your public radio affiliate is for NPR and go through their website. If it's taken too long for you to find it, send them an email, right? Introduce yourself and say, like, hey, I'm so-and-so. I would love to know what your rules are around creating and submitting a PSA. They'll do that. Also, there's community radio stations as well. So in my hometown, WRIR, I actually have a radio show, Women in Politics. If anyone wants to have a PSA, you can hit me up for that as well. But look for community independent radio as well as public radio stations in your area. Send them an email introducing yourself and asking, do you run PSAs? And yes, if so, what's the criteria for that? And they will, more often than not, they're generally friendly people. They can give you that information.
Well, Cherie, thank you so much. Thank you to your mom for joining us today as well. We really are honored to have her with us too. And we really hope that this is the beginning of a long relationship with Build and our home-based childcare community. So thank you, everyone. Jonathan, if you could go to the next slide, it's our contact information and one more slide. We will look forward to seeing everyone again for our next national webinar on October 18th. So it'll be the same time. If you want to hold that space on your calendar, we will send out the information shortly. Otherwise, we thank you so much and ask that as you sign off, you'll notice a survey pops up. If you can take just a minute and give us some feedback, it helps us bring you content that is really tailored to what you need in the moment. So Cherie, thank you so much once again from all of us and from our audience. We really appreciate you.